Victoria stood in her parents' dining room, the air thick with noise, laughter, and something sharper hiding beneath it all. The table was crowded with food, voices overlapping as if nothing in the world could go wrong here. Her husband Lucas sat beside her, cutting chicken into small pieces for his 8-year-old daughter Angela, who was talking too fast to remember to chew. Across the room, Victoria's mother moved about with a list in hand, planning the upcoming family reunion with proud excitement. Everything looked warm on the surface like it always did on Sunday nights. But Victoria had lived in this house long enough to know that warmth could turn cold without warning. And tonight something in the room already felt slightly off. Angela listened closely as Victoria's mother described the reunion plans, her small face lighting up with every new detail. "Will we get to touch the stingrays at the aquarium?" she asked, leaning forward with quiet excitement. The question hung in the air longer than it should have, and the room shifted in a way Victoria could not ignore. Her sister Mary glanced at their mother before looking away, while her brother Collins suddenly became interested in wiping his daughter's hands. Victoria forced a smile and answered quickly, "Yes, if they still have the touch tank open." Angela smiled back, relieved, and went back to eating as if everything was fine. But Victoria noticed her mother didn't return the smile, and neither did Mary. A few minutes later, Victoria's mother stepped closer, her voice calm but firm. "There's no space for her at the reunion," she said, as if discussing something ordinary. Victoria blinked, certain she had misunderstood, and asked quietly, "No space for who?" Her mother didn't hesitate. "For Angela. The numbers are already finalized." Victoria's mind tried to solve it like a simple problem, thinking of extra chairs and open spots, but something deeper told her this wasn't about space at all. "Then add one more," Victoria said, her voice steady. But her mother's expression didn't change, and that was when Victoria realized this decision had already been made without her. Mary stepped in before their mother had to explain further, her tone calm in a way that made it worse. "Victoria, she's not really family," she said, as if stating a simple fact. Angela's hands froze over her plate, though she didn't look up, and Victoria felt her chest tighten instantly. Around the table no one spoke up, not their father, not Collins, not anyone. Victoria set her cup down carefully, her voice quiet but firm. "She is my daughter," she said. "She lives in my house and I help raise her." Her mother sighed like Victoria was the one making things difficult. "Don't make this dramatic," she replied. But Victoria could already feel something inside her changing, something final. Victoria looked at Angela, then really looked, and saw the question in her eyes that no child should have to ask. Angela wasn't waiting for kindness from the others. She was waiting to see what Victoria would do. That realization settled deep in Victoria's chest, heavier than anything said at the table. Without raising her voice, she reached for her bag, her movements slow and deliberate. Her father frowned. "Victoria, what are you doing?" he asked, but she didn't answer immediately. Instead, she pulled out the house keys her parents had given her years ago, the symbol of belonging they had always valued. The room grew quiet as she stood up, holding the keys in her hand, already knowing this moment would change everything. Victoria wrapped her fingers tightly around the keys, feeling the weight of them press into her palm like a decision already made. She looked at her mother first, then at Mary, letting the silence stretch long enough to be uncomfortable. "If Angela isn't family," she said slowly, her voice calm but carrying across the room, "then neither am I." The words landed harder than shouting ever could, and for a moment no one moved. Her mother let out a sharp breath, shaking her head as if Victoria had just embarrassed her. "Don't be ridiculous," she snapped. But Victoria didn't pick the keys back up, and that was when everyone realized she meant it. Mary gave a short, uneasy laugh, folding her arms like she was trying to brush it off. "So now you're making a scene over nothing?" she said, her tone light but strained. Collins avoided eye contact completely, staring down at his plate as if the food had suddenly become very important. Victoria's father muttered her name under his breath, a warning he used when she was younger. But none of it reached her the same way anymore. Victoria had spent years smoothing over moments like this, explaining them away, pretending they weren't what they clearly were. This time she didn't soften anything. This time she stood exactly where she was. Lucas stepped closer, his eyes moving quickly from the keys on the table to Victoria's face, then to Angela. He didn't ask questions right away, and that alone told Victoria he understood enough. Angela sat frozen in her chair, her hands now tucked under the table, her eyes shining with tears she was trying hard not to let fall. "Get your coat, Angela," Lucas said gently, his voice steady and certain. Victoria picked up her purse without hesitation. "We're leaving," she added, not looking at anyone else in the room. No one stopped them. No one called Angela back or tried to fix what had just happened. They walked out into the cool evening air, leaving behind the smell of food and the echo of voices that had suddenly gone quiet. In the car, the silence felt heavier than the argument itself. Lucas started the engine, then glanced at Victoria. "What just happened?" he asked quietly. Victoria kept her eyes on the road ahead for a moment before answering. "I'll explain when we get home," she said, her voice controlled but tight. In the back seat, Angela stared out the window, her reflection faint against the glass. She didn't speak, and that silence said more than anything else could have. When they got home, Angela moved slowly, slipping off her shoes and placing them neatly by the door instead of tossing them aside like she usually did. Victoria noticed every small difference, every quiet sign that something inside her had shifted. Lucas watched them both, his expression serious now, waiting for the truth he knew was coming. Victoria took a breath, steadying herself before speaking. "They said there's no space for Angela at the reunion," she said finally. Lucas's face changed instantly, confusion giving way to disbelief. "They said what?" he asked, his voice low. And Victoria knew this was only the beginning of something much bigger than one dinner table. Victoria leaned against the kitchen counter, her hands resting flat as she repeated everything slowly, leaving nothing out. "My mom said there was no space for her," she said, her voice steady but heavy. "And Mary said she's not really family." Lucas stared at her for a second like he was trying to process words that didn't make sense. "They said that in front of Angela?" he asked quietly. Victoria nodded once. The silence that followed felt different, sharper than before. Lucas ran a hand through his hair, pacing once across the kitchen like he needed movement to contain what he was feeling. "She heard it," Victoria added, softer now. "Maybe not every word, but enough." Lucas stopped walking and looked toward the hallway where Angela's room was. "I should have been paying attention," he said, his voice tight with frustration. Victoria shook her head immediately. "No. This isn't on you," she replied. "They've been doing this for a while, just not this openly." Lucas looked back at her, something in his expression shifting from confusion to something firmer. "We're not letting this slide," he said. "Not with her." His words were calm, but they carried weight. Victoria nodded slowly, feeling that same clarity settle deeper inside her. "I already made a decision," she said. "We're not going to that reunion." Lucas didn't hesitate. "Good," he answered immediately. "Because we don't go where our child isn't welcome." The way he said, "our child," made something in Victoria's chest ease, even in the middle of everything. It wasn't forced or emphasized. It was natural, like it had always been true. Victoria exhaled quietly, realizing she hadn't been alone in that dining room after all. She just hadn't heard him yet. Later that night, Victoria found Angela sitting on her bed, lining up her stuffed animals in a perfect row. Then she moved them apart. Then lined them up again. Victoria recognized the pattern immediately, the quiet way children tried to make sense of things they couldn't control. "Hey," she said gently, stepping into the room. Angela didn't look up right away. "Did I do something wrong at dinner?" she asked, her voice small and careful. The question hit harder than anything said at the table earlier. Victoria sat beside her, keeping her voice calm and steady. "No," she said firmly. "You didn't do anything wrong. Not one thing." Angela's fingers twisted the edge of her blanket as she spoke again. "Grandma doesn't want me there because I'm not really yours," she said, repeating the words like she had been holding them in. Victoria felt something inside her lock into place, stronger than before. "Listen to me," she said, gently lifting Angela's chin so their eyes met. "You are my family. That is not something anyone gets to decide for me." Angela blinked quickly, trying to hold herself together, but a tear slipped down her cheek anyway. "Even though I had another mom first?" she asked in a quiet voice. Victoria didn't hesitate. "Yes," she said gently. "Your mom will always be your mom and I will always respect that. But I am your family too, and that is not temporary." Angela stared at her for a moment, searching her face like she needed to be sure. Then she leaned forward and wrapped her arms around Victoria, holding on tightly. Victoria closed her eyes briefly, holding her back just as firmly. Are you still going to the reunion? Angela asked after a moment, her voice softer now but still unsure. Victoria pulled back slightly and shook her head. No, she said. If you are not welcome, then I am not going. None of us are. Angela let out a slow breath, like she had been holding it since dinner, and rested her head against Victoria's shoulder. In that moment, the decision stopped being about pride or anger. It became simple. It was about protecting a child who trusted her completely. And Victoria knew she would make the same choice again without hesitation. Later that night, after Angela had fallen asleep, Lucas found Victoria standing in the kitchen, staring at nothing in particular. Tell me everything again, he said, his tone serious but controlled. Victoria repeated it all, from the moment Angela asked about the aquarium to the exact words her mother and Mary had used. Lucas listened without interrupting, his expression tightening with each detail. When she finished, he let out a slow breath. They said that where she could hear, he asked. Victoria nodded. That seemed to settle something in him. We're done with that, Lucas said firmly. We're not going to keep showing up for people who treat her like she doesn't belong. Victoria looked at him, surprised at how quickly he had drawn that line. I've been trying to make it work, she admitted quietly. I thought if I just kept including her, they would eventually accept her. Lucas shook his head. That's not how people like that work, he replied. They already made their decision. Now we make ours. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried a finality that left no room for doubt. Victoria sat down at the kitchen table and opened her laptop, her mind already moving toward something practical. I send my parents money every month, she said. And I go there every Sunday to help with everything. Lucas watched her carefully as she continued. I'm stopping all of it, she added, her voice calm. She canceled the automatic transfer first, her fingers steady on the keyboard. Then she drafted a short message, simple and direct, letting her parents know she would no longer be available to help. She read it once, then pressed send without changing a single word. And just like that, everything shifted. Victoria stared at the screen for a moment after sending the message, feeling the weight of it settle in quietly. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but it was real and it was done. Lucas stood behind her, resting his hands lightly on her shoulders. Are you okay? He asked softly. Victoria nodded, though her chest felt tight in a way she couldn't fully explain. I think so, she replied. I'm just finished trying. Lucas didn't say anything else, just squeezed her shoulder once, understanding that this wasn't something words could fix. The first call came less than an hour later, and it wasn't from her parents. Mary's name flashed across Victoria's phone and she answered after a brief pause. What do you think you're doing? Mary demanded immediately, her voice sharp and angry. Victoria stayed calm. What do you mean? She asked. Mary scoffed. You pulled your money out of the reunion and now Mom is stuck paying for everything, she said. Victoria didn't raise her voice. You told me my daughter isn't family, she replied. So I'm not contributing to something she's excluded from. Mary tried to talk over her, throwing words like selfish and dramatic into the conversation, but Victoria didn't engage with it the way she used to. This isn't about my feelings, Victoria said evenly. This is about how Angela was treated. There was a brief silence on the other end before Mary spoke again, her tone colder now. You're choosing them over your real family, she said. Victoria didn't hesitate. No, she replied. I'm choosing the family I'm responsible for. Then she ended the call before Mary could say anything else. Not long after, Collins called, his approach quieter but no less frustrating. You know Mom and Dad rely on you, he said, trying to sound reasonable. You can't just walk away like this. Victoria leaned back in her chair, already tired of the conversation. I didn't walk away, she said. They pushed me out the moment they said Angela wasn't family. Collins sighed. You're making this bigger than it needs to be, he insisted. Victoria shook her head even though he couldn't see her. No, she said calmly. They made it exactly what it is. Later that night, Victoria told Lucas to get Angela ready, and they drove to a small diner down the road. It wasn't planned, just something simple to shift the mood. Angela sat between them, slowly starting to smile again as Lucas made a silly face with whipped cream on his lip. Victoria watched her laugh, the sound soft but real, and felt something inside her settle. This was what mattered. Not the reunion, not the arguments, not the expectations she had carried for years. Just this moment, this table, and the family that chose each other without conditions. The next morning felt quieter than usual, but not in a heavy way. Victoria moved through the kitchen making breakfast, noticing how normal everything seemed despite what had shifted the night before. Angela sat at the table, swinging her legs slightly, more relaxed than she had been since dinner. Lucas poured juice into 3 glasses and set one in front of her with a small smile. "Big plans today?" he asked lightly. Angela shrugged. "Maybe I'll finish my drawing," she said. Victoria watched her carefully, realizing the tension hadn't disappeared completely, but it was already loosening. Over the next few days, the silence from Victoria's parents stretched on, and at first it felt strange. She had been so used to constant contact, small requests, and weekly visits that the absence felt unfamiliar. But as the days passed, that silence started to feel less like something missing and more like space she hadn't realized she needed. Lucas noticed it too. "You're not checking your phone as much," he said one evening. Victoria gave a small nod. "There's nothing to check anymore," she replied. And for the first time that didn't make her anxious. Still, news found its way back to her through extended family. An aunt called to ask how she was doing and mentioned casually that her mother had been complaining about managing medications alone. Another relative hinted that the reunion had gone on as planned, though not without tension. Victoria listened but didn't react the way she might have before. She didn't rush to fix anything or explain herself. Instead, she simply said, "I hope they figure it out," and left it at that. It wasn't cold, it was just honest. Mary, however, didn't stop completely. A few days later, she sent a long message filled with complaints about how difficult everything had become. She talked about money, about responsibilities, about how Victoria had left them all to deal with things alone. Victoria read it once, then set her phone down without replying. Lucas glanced at her. "Not answering?" he asked. Victoria shook her head. "There's nothing new in that message," she said. "Just the same thinking that got us here." And for once she didn't feel the need to defend herself. By the end of the week, something inside Victoria had fully settled into place. The anger that had flared that night was gone, replaced by something quieter and stronger. She wasn't waiting for an apology anymore, and she wasn't hoping things would go back to how they were. She understood now that some lines once crossed couldn't be undone. That evening, as she tucked Angela into bed, Angela looked up at her and smiled softly. "I like it better when it's just us," she said. Victoria smiled back, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Me too," she replied, knowing she meant it completely. The family reunion came and went without them, and Victoria only knew because of a single photo that appeared briefly online. Matching shirts, wide smiles, children lined up neatly under a bright sky, everything looking exactly as it was meant to. Everything except Angela. Victoria stared at the image for a moment, then quietly closed the app. She didn't feel the sharp pain she might have expected. Instead, there was a calm understanding that the picture had always been incomplete. What they showed the world had never matched what they allowed behind closed doors. A few days later, another aunt called, her voice softer this time. "I'm sorry," she said without hesitation. "I didn't realize how things were for Angela." Victoria listened, appreciating the honesty more than anything else. "Thank you," she replied simply. They spoke for a few minutes, not about the reunion but about everyday things. When the call ended, Victoria felt something shift again, not back to what was, but toward something healthier. She wasn't losing everything. She was just seeing clearly who was willing to stand on the right side of things. Meanwhile, stories began to circulate from her parents' side, each one shaped to make Victoria look unreasonable. Collins told relatives she had overreacted and abandoned her responsibilities. Mary hinted that Victoria had let emotions cloud her judgment and hurt the family over something small. Victoria heard about it through different people, but she didn't rush to correct every version. She had learned that not every story needed her voice immediately. The truth had a way of settling where it mattered most. One evening, Lucas sat beside her on the couch, noticing her quiet expression. "Does it bother you?" he asked. Victoria thought about it for a second before answering. "Not the way it used to," she said. "I know what happened. You know what happened. Angela knows she's loved. That's enough." Lucas nodded, leaning back as he took in her words. "You've changed," he said. Victoria gave a small smile. "No," she replied. I've just stopped pretending. That weekend they spent the afternoon at a park, something simple and unplanned. Angela ran ahead, laughing as she chased after a ball, her energy bright and carefree again. Victoria watched her, noticing how the worry she had seen before was slowly fading away. Lucas stood beside her, his hand brushing against hers. "She's okay," he said quietly. Victoria nodded. "She is," she replied. And in that moment she realized that walking away hadn't broken anything important. It had protected exactly what mattered most. A few weeks later the silence broke in an unexpected way. Victoria received a message from her mother, short and carefully worded. "I think we should talk," it read. Victoria stared at it for a long moment, her thumb hovering over the screen. A part of her recognized the pattern immediately, the timing, the calm tone after weeks of distance. It wasn't an apology. It was an opening, one that expected her to step back into her old role without anything truly changing. Victoria placed her phone down on the table without replying. That evening she showed the message to Lucas while Angela worked on her homework nearby. "What do you think?" she asked quietly. Lucas read it, then looked up at her. "Do you believe anything is different?" he asked. Victoria didn't answer right away because the truth came easily once she stopped overthinking it. "No," she said finally. Lucas nodded once. "Then you already have your answer," he replied. It wasn't about being harsh or unforgiving. It was about recognizing when a door had been closed for a reason. Days passed and Victoria never responded to the message. There were no follow-ups, no second attempts, just silence again. But this time it felt different. It didn't feel like distance or tension. It felt like clarity. Victoria had spent years trying to hold everything together, smoothing edges, making excuses and hoping things would change. Now she wasn't carrying that weight anymore. She had chosen a boundary and she was standing by it without needing approval from anyone else. One afternoon, while helping Angela with a small scrape on her knee, Victoria heard something that made her pause. "Mom, can you pass me the bandage?" Angela said casually. The word hung in the air for a second longer than usual. Victoria looked at her, surprised, but Angela didn't seem unsure or hesitant. She had said it naturally, like it had always been there. Victoria smiled softly, handing her the bandage. "Of course," she replied, her voice warm. And in that moment, everything felt complete in a way it never had before. A year later, Victoria's life was quieter, but it was also stronger and more certain. Some family ties had been left behind, and others had quietly found their way back with honesty and respect. Her parents, Mary and Collins, remained distant, and that distance stayed firm. But Victoria no longer felt the need to question it. She had chosen the family that chose her back without conditions or exceptions. As she watched Angela laugh with Lucas in the living room, she realized something simple but powerful. Walking away hadn't been the loss she feared. It had been the beginning of everything they truly needed.